Greetings to you. Welcome inside the parlor in this special, festive, pre-Christmas holiday edition of the Holy Trinity show, our last before the Boxing Day clash with Liverpool. I'm feeling very festive because this is the scene outside Holy Trinity headquarters. That's my son coming home from his friend's place, and it's absolutely dumping with snow here in Delta, British Columbia, Canada, and it just makes me feel so warm and cozy inside. And part of the reason that I love this time of year so much, maybe you're the same, is that I've always associated Christmas and the holidays with Aston Villa. Because ever since I was 10 or 11, I was getting either the new Aston Villa Subbuteo team to play with or Subbuteo Accessories, a shooter match magazine. I'd have to follow their festive exploits by reading about it in the newspaper, which tells you how old I am. And then later in life, you get the gear and you can watch all the games. And speaking of gear, if you are trying to buy before the holidays, probably too late, but there are still great deals to be had, which will arrive after Christmas. I'll tell you about the Boxing Day specials during the Liverpool show. If you are going retro, and this shirt also reminds me of being 10 or 11 years of age, size down though on the retro, because all of it is bigger than what you'd get from the Castor gear. I have a link in the description below. Hit that to get any and all of those deals and support the show at the same time. Right, today I want to talk about Emiliano Martinez just a little bit because his exploits at the World Cup are going to have ramifications. I think mostly positive for Aston Villa, but there are some negative downsides to being really, really dominant when it matters the most. But mostly, I want to talk about the January transfer window because Aston Villa has been linked with a lot of players, many of whom have similarities in profile. And that's the part of the show that's really important and very encouraging. So let's pour something festive. It's got to be eggnog. We've got a local dairy that makes this fantastic eggnog, which I'm spiking with Leon Bailey's, as we talk the upcoming transfer window and Aston Villa's January plans. Honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the Emiliano Martinez "thou shalt not pass" save in stoppage time of extra time to deny France its second World Cup in a row. I'm not going to lie to you. I squealed and then peed a little during this moment because in this moment, which came out of absolutely nowhere, how this chance could have even occurred is one thing. But the fact that he was still mentally switched on in what had to have been the most mentally exhausting game in the history of football, that he had the mentality of, you are not getting this ball past me now. Think about how different the story could have been otherwise. And then he still had to go on and deny Kingsley Coleman from the penalty spot before getting into Tchouamani's head. We have a World Cup winner and a key contributor to one of the most epic World Cups of all time in the core, the leadership core of our football club, and the implications are going to be great for Aston Villa and the player. I mean, I've seen it already in my Twitter followers, new fans from Argentina wanting to find out more about Dibu's club football, and fans from other countries around the world. Martinez's confidence is going to be sky high. His valuation is going to be sky higher. And the reaction from Villa fans is a bit odd. It's like, well, that's it. He's gone. He's out of here. He's leaving. Can we not just celebrate for a moment the fact that this man will never have to pay for a meal or a drink again in his country? I mean, he's a legend. He's immortalized. He is going to inspire an entire generation of new goalkeepers, including females, all of whom want to be the next Dibu. He has conquered the all-time footballer's bucket list, winning Mundial on top of the Copa America. It's hard to even think of, to be honest. It is almost folkloric. Aston Villa provided Emiliano Martinez with the platform to go on and become a national treasure and legend in Argentina. And I believe him. I think he's sincere when he says he's loyal to this club and wants to help Aston Villa achieve European success. And now he has to hurry up and finish celebrating so he can be home in time for the Liverpool game. However, if another big European club that is regularly in the late stages of Champions League competition, one that expects to be in a final, maybe achieving it through a penalty shootout, and if they came along and said, we want that guy because he's the new Tim Krul as far as penalty whisperers are concerned, well, then they can pay the 75 to 100 million pounds that Aston Villa will be asking. And if they pull that off, it will be one of the greatest pieces of business in the history of this football club, especially if they reinvest that money wisely. It'll also be one of the most emotional farewells since Diego Carlos left Sevilla. But Emmy's the kind of guy who I could see even coming back to us later in his career. Bottom line is, can we not worry about any of this right now and just be happy for this incredible achievement? I've been saying it for a long time on this show. If you really want to achieve European places, you must significantly upgrade the quality and talent of the current squad, and that's a very difficult thing to do. Villa has tried to bring in players here, hoping they can get to here, but talent identification, even with analytics, is so subjective and difficult. Nobody can tell if a player will go from here to here. So what do you have to do? You have to buy them when they're here and pay the money. And I think that's a far more likely pursuit now with Unai Emery in charge than it would have been with Steven Gerrard at the helm, simply because football is still a very small industry and word travels fast about reputation, environments, and climates of clubs, frankly. So how can you mitigate some of the risk of outlaying that kind of money for that kind of players? What kind of category of player are you looking for? Well, I've got a couple of ideas. Firstly, if a player is a bona fide inked-in starter of his national team, that's usually a pretty good sign that he is quality. And you know, that next tier, the next cycle of players who are looking to become inked-in members of their national teams, well, maybe there's a better value proposition there, even with a little bit of risk. But here's another thing. Players that have European club competition on their resumes. That's a very valuable asset for a club that wants to get to those competitions. Later in the show, I'm going to put up a chart that has the categories that I just talked about and some others, and I'll show you how many of these rumored targets are similar in terms of those categories. And that's why I think Aston Villa is completely changing its transfer strategy, and that is exciting news. One thing that is abundantly clear based on the evidence of rumors is that Aston Villa's top priority in this window is goals. A player who can score them, create them, do both consistently, and maybe even have the stature to physically occupy defenders, thus creating opportunities for others. And there's no question, the biggest link we've been associated with in the window is Portuguese international João Félix. 23 years of age, Atletico paid a fortune for him. They crashed out of the Champions League, so now they have to sell him. His agent is Jorge Mendes, who's a friend of Nassif Sawiris and who's the agent of Unai Emery. And that relationship is important because I believe that relationship is what brought Emery to Aston Villa. Now, Mendes will be telling his client, you're going to go there and play, increase your profile, and you will be sculpted under the tutelage of one of the world's best teacher coaches in Unai Emery. Even though as a loan to potentially buy, his salary is an eye-watering $400,000 per week. And I would wonder, well, why didn't it work at Atletico? This is the most sought-after transfer target in this window in the world right now. I don't think there's a question about that. But why didn't it work under another very demanding manager in Diego Simeone? Is that a lot to pay for a 23-year-old who is now entering his prime? These are questions I cannot answer. Now, his girlfriend happens to be a lady by the name of Margarita, who is a Portuguese actress, model, and influencer. And I was looking at her Instagram, and she loves to spend time at the beach. How are the beaches in B6? I'm just not sure if this couple is Brummy material, but we'll see. Rumored attacking target number 2, Marcus Thuram of Borussia Mönchengladbach, turns 26 years of age in August. His contract expires this June, which is why there is a sudden interest in his services. Rumored fee about £25 million, can play on the left wing or straight up front. But the number, on top of 10 goals and 3 assists from 15 Bundesliga games, the number I like the most, 6'4". And I would put him in the emerging list of players trying to become inked-in members of their national team. We saw him come on just before halftime of the World Cup final, and although he didn't pop off the stage in that match necessarily, there were definitely glimpses as to why I don't think a lot of defenders would look forward to playing against him. If you have watched this program for any length of time, you know how much I bang on about having a Villa way, a thread or a style of football that can carry through all the different generations. And one thing I've noticed in my 43 years of support is that Villa Nation has always had a fondness, even an affinity with the big target striker. And maybe that tradition began with the king, Peter Withe, because he was dominant in the air. He was still good with his feet, but his physical presence also created a lot of opportunities for Gary Shaw and others during the glory years. More recently, Dion Dublin had a lot of those attributes: personality, big character, big player, could score goals all different ways, as could John Carew. He's bigger than me and you. And then most recently, of course, Christian Benteke, who absolutely dominated for, sadly, such a short period, but a glorious period of time, scoring goals every single way and also creating opportunities for others. I think Marcus Thuram, with his stature, his ability, and his potential, could fit that bill and become a crowd favorite, entering his prime and on an expiring contract. So Gladbach, despite being in and around the European places, are probably going to be forced to sell him. And unfortunately, there are going to be other suitors in competition for his signature, including Inter Milan. Well, looky here. I probably don't need to speak too much on this player because I'm sure you're familiar. What's not to like? Young, big, imposing striker, familiarity. I guess the big question for me would be why the drop-off in form currently with Roma compared to how prolific he was last year. And there's also an issue of cost. I mean, it's not my money, but I do love a club that conducts shrewd and effective and bumper business, frankly. I'm also in two minds about sequels, because sequels are never as good as the original. And although familiarity with the club, the facilities, the surroundings, even some of the people is a good thing for integration, and the fact that the fans will already be familiar and will have revered his work during the promotion season and already love him before he steps onto the Villa Park pitch, again, conceivably, we do have this habit in our fan base of unrealistic expectations at times, and I worry that this player, like Ollie Watkins, if going through a dip in form like he's going through right now with Roma, could divide the fan base. Next on the list of potential forward targets for Aston Villa is Matheus Cunha of Atletico Madrid, turning 24 in May, 8 caps for Brazil, also heavily linked with Wolves. Fee understood to be around £45 million. This is a guy who looks like he's going to be part of Brazil's next cycle, as he was kind of on the fringes of this year's World Cup squad. And he can play all three front positions, which is encouraging. Has the same agent as Diego Carlos. There'll be some familiarity with Carlos and Dougie, of course. I guess my concern with this player is the goal tally thus far in his career is a little bit underwhelming. I hear an awful lot about flair, dynamism, athleticism, an exciting prospect. But Aston Villa needs goals, and they need goals right now. Next on the list, Nicholas Jackson via Real. It's going to take $27 million to trigger his release clause, but here's a Senegalese international who turns just 22 in June of next year. So lots of potential and upside, but also a slight risk on that young side. He can dribble, he can score, he could set up his teammates. His familiarity with Unai Emery should speed up integration into systems and processes, which is always a good thing. I always do worry a little bit about the manager bringing back his former players from a previous club syndrome. I can't be a hypocrite. I've talked about that with Steven Gerrard, so I have to talk about it now. But I think the bigger concern I have is that so many people have compared him to Ollie Watkins. And frankly, we don't need another Ollie Watkins. We need somebody who is a significant upgrade and more prolific consistently than Ollie Watkins. Here's a name for you, Paul Onwuachu of Genk. He turns 29 next May. His contract runs through June of 2024. He's a Nigerian international, and it'll probably cost about £20 million to pry him away from the Jupiler Pro League of Belgium, which Aston Villa has had sort of a patchy success record of doing transfer business with ever since Benteke, when you consider Wesley and Bjorn Engels and Samata, and to a lesser extent, Marvelous Nakamba. But the guy is scoring at a goal-a-game pace. He scored 23 from 43 in all competitions last year. But this is the most important number, 6'7". You heard right, 6'7". He is going to dominate in both penalty areas, no matter how you stack it up. Nigerian international. There are late bloomers, not a bad price, but what is he more of in terms of a potential player coming from Belgium to Aston Villa? Is he more Samata? Is he more Benteke? All right, I'm going here and I'm doing this. The idea of Jude Bellingham joining Manchester City makes a lot of sense on a number of fronts. I mean, he is a rising star of football, and only so few clubs would have the resources to be able to bring him in, and wouldn't it be nice for him to play in his home country? He would also be joining a number of his core England teammates, all playing club football together at the highest level and in European competitions. And it would mean a reunion with Erling Haaland, and maybe they could rekindle their prolific partnership that they had at Dortmund. Now, in order to bring him in, City has to shed some money. They've been very good at doing that over the past couple of transfer windows. And if my memory serves correctly, the third installment of the Jack Grealish transfer fee is due to Aston Villa imminently, so that could factor. Now, Grealish is on 300,000 bones per week, but I believe he is worth every penny of that to Aston Villa if he's allowed to be the player he was when he left. Give us that Jack Grealish with a bunch of better players around him and a better manager, I would forgive and forget, and a part of my soul would feel whole again. Also, I think we want as many Villa through and through players in this squad as possible. That helps with recruitment. That helps show academy players, where a lot of resources have been put, that there is a pathway into the first team. My only concern would be the off-field stuff, which has persisted throughout Jack Grealish's career. And I accept that with genius comes some insanity at times. And I say this in the most loving and complimentary fashion. Jack Grealish has a lot of the attributes of Georgie Best. He is a marauding, rampaging maverick of a beautiful football player who loves to have a good time off the field, and I don't begrudge him for that. The other position that Aston Villa seems to be prioritizing based on rumors is center back, and one of the big names, not just for Villa, but a lot of clubs around the world. In fact, maybe one of the most sought after players in the coming transfer windows is Villarreal center back Pau Torres, who was kind of on the fringes of the Spain team at this past World Cup, but as a 26-year-old this coming January, just entering his prime as a central defender. Obviously familiar with Unai Emery and vice versa. And will the Emery pull maybe be the difference because he was close to signing with Spurs last year, but decided to stay at Villarreal, which is his hometown and hometown club. You know, the agent will be pushing for him to take that next step in his career. $50 million release clause is a pretty good ticket, but his best attribute, even as a 6'3" central defender, a big man, is his poise and intelligence on the football. He's not a bully. He's not a physical tough guy. He is a footballer, and we need that kind of center back if we want to step forward and really play Unai Emery's system. And the idea of Pau Torres, Diego Carlos center back pairing as early as this year, I'm not going to lie, that's kind of enticing. Another relatively high-profile center back we've been linked with beyond this window, and whose contract is expiring this June, is Dutch international Stefan de Vrij of Inter, who turns 31 in February, has 60 caps for the Netherlands, but didn't feature with Holland in this past World Cup. But still, 450 senior club appearances under his belt and a lot of European competition, particularly with Inter. So if it's experience we want, this could be the guy. 6'3", and maybe a fellow who bridges the gap before some of these young guys like Kerr Smith or Josh Feeney are ready for prime time, even though it usually takes longer to develop as a center back. But Ezri Konsa is also entering the prime years of his career. He needs to be challenged, and it appears pretty obvious right now that neither Callum Chambers nor Jan Bednarak are going to factor in this Villa squad. And the last of the rumored center back targets is 32 in January Real Madrid stalwart Nacho Fernandez, who's not a big guy, 5'11", but can play both as a center back and as a fullback and is very comfortable playing out of the back, has European Cup competition behind him, international caliber player. Not a physical presence necessarily, but because his contract expires this coming June, maybe there's a bargain to be had there. Now, I think Aston Villa has finally come to the conclusion that Robin Olsen simply isn't the answer to back up Emiliano Martinez, and that's why we've seen a couple of links to goalkeepers over the past couple of weeks, including Sevilla and Morocco shot stopper Yassine Bono. He already knows Diego Carlos, so that's positive because that's an important relationship with a center back. But my question would be, would Bono, at 31 years of age with prime goalkeeping years ahead of him, even want to come to Villa to potentially back up Emiliano Martinez unless the club has hatched a succession plan, knowing that there's going to be a lot of interest in the Golden Glove winning goalkeeper? I think Bono would have legitimately been the runner-up to that award given his exploits in the World Cup. He was fabulous for Morocco. This would be a really shrewd signing one way or another. Either keep Emiliano Martinez sharp, have somebody just in case of injury or suspension, or potentially a starter in coming seasons. And Villa has also been linked with Spain's #1 goalkeeper, 26 years of age in June, Unai Simon, who plays for Athletic Bilbao and was the starter for Spain in all of their games at the World Cup. About 25 million euros is the reported fee, same agent as Jack Grealish and Ezri Konsa, so I'd be wary of that. But was it a good World Cup for Unai Simon? Probably not if you are bounced in the round of 16 by Morocco, where it was Yassine Bono who was the penalty hero. But still, this is the guy who has unseated David De Gea as Spain's #1 goalkeeper. So you have to look at his potential and age and say, maybe there's a bargain to be had there as a very reliable, not just backup to Emiliano Martinez, but maybe future starter at Villa Park. Now, all these names I've just thrown out there, all these potential transfer links, pure speculation, total rumor. We have no idea if there's even a shred of truth to any of them. But when you put them all together, a picture is starting to emerge of the potential transfer policies under Unai Emery. We know we're probably going after a striker because we need goals. And despite Diego Carlos's return imminent, it looks like we're also targeting a center back and a potential backup to Emiliano Martinez. But that's not all. Here's a chart I've created listing all of the potential transfer targets on the left and a series of criteria that I think Aston Villa is legitimately prioritizing or at least factoring in Unai Emery's new transfer policy based on the fact that I think he wants to make a statement signing as early as January. And those categories include, is a player approaching in or just outside his prime? Is he a legitimate starter for his country in international competition? Has he played in European competition with his club? Is he on an expiring contract? And although this may seem silly, is he 6'1" or above? And what's fascinating about this list is that 7 out of these 12 names are actually 6'3" and above. So is Villa prioritizing a larger statured, physically imposing player in their recruitment? Well, it would appear so. Most of these players are either in or approaching their prime. There are many international starters, but a lot of players who want to become international starters. The most dramatic column, though, is look at how many players have experience in European Cup competitions. And as Unai Emery has had a wonderful track record in those competitions, maybe he has said, we need to prioritize this in our recruitment. What's also interesting is that there are not a lot of players on expiring contracts here, which means that maybe Aston Villa is not worried about money or value or bargains or players that have to be sold because their contracts are winding down. They just want the best player for the best price. One thing I find very interesting of this list of rumored transfer targets is that only Jack Grealish currently plays for another Premier League team, and only he and Tammy Abraham are the Englishmen on this list. The days of, well, you need Premier League experience to win in the Premier League and you need Englishmen who understand the robust nature and the culture of it all to succeed. I don't believe that anymore. This league is getting more and more global. And frankly, I'm getting a little tired of seeing Aston Villa linked with high potential players from around the world who then end up signing for other Premier League clubs, usually in London, and succeeding. I'm thinking most specifically of Julian Alvarez and Rodrigo Bentancur, but not that long ago, we were also linked to Rodrigo de Paul and Nicolas Tagliafico, both of whom helped Argentina win Mundial. You and I have known for quite some time that there is an obvious need for a predatory, prolific, and most importantly, consistent goal scorer in this side. It's one of the key issues. But Unai Emery's not coming to us and saying, what do I need in this squad? He's got to see it for himself. He has to experience it firsthand and decide, can I rehabilitate what we have, or do we have to go and hit the market? But here's the math on the subject. If we were to increase our goal output by, let's be very conservative, 1/3 per game, 1/3 to a half per game for the rest of the season, and we were able to reduce our goals allowed by 1/3 to 1/2 for the rest of the season, well, those margins would add up. Hence, why there's a lot of strikers and central defenders and even backup goalkeepers on the list that I showed you. And I don't want to get carried away, but if Aston Villa beat Liverpool on Boxing Day, they'll be 1 point behind them and in 6th place in the league. So it's not really that far-fetched to suggest that bringing in some quality in January may truly help us solidify a spot in one of those single-digit places in the table. I was never feeling this positive like I am right now at this time last year. And if our owners were really keeping the handbrake on spending until they saw tangible improvement from the coaching staff, well, fair play to them. This was the last show before the holidays, whether you celebrate Hanukkah, Yule, Kwanzaa, Christmas, it doesn't matter. I hope you spend it with the people that matter most in your lives, and I can't thank you enough for supporting this show. On behalf of my producer, Rob, and my family, Merry Christmas to you and yours, season's greetings, and of course, up the mighty Villa.